sort of have this instant seared into my memory a bit. Just spotted this pig running across. I really didn't have any time to react to it, just a case of there it was. Planted my foot, you know, next thing really was airbags going off in my face and silence.
G'day everyone, I'm just making myself a bit of a drawbar to get a broken down vehicle off a trailer, and it's pretty basic. It's just a beam with a trailer hitch on each end, and we're going to hook it onto the tow ball on the car, and then we'll hook one onto one of my tractors and we'll tow it off like that, and that way we'll be in control of it without it wanting to run away and get broken on the way down. But it's one of those situations where it seemed like a good idea this morning, and then I've spent half the morning trying to find the pieces. And these old trailer hitches have been sitting around in the might come in handy one day pile for the last 20 years or so. So they've needed a few repairs, and I've been tapping threads out and cleaning threads up, but we're nearly a goer. So just nip this up on here, and we can put the piece back onto it, make it all work, and we can unload a car. Okay, ready to go. So you can see our fixed drawbar now, and what we'll use is the tractor in creeper gear, and we can just allow the ute to come down off the trailer, and if we have to stop, we've got the tractor brakes to just stop it all of a sudden, and that'll work great. So we'll get Bill on the tractor and we'll start moving it, but the further complication is the front bumper on the ute's spread out and it's going to get caught on the trailer, and I don't think there's a whole lot holding it on the ute, so that may fall off as it comes down. So we'll see how we go. And hopefully, it's pretty windy out here that you can actually hear what I'm saying. Righto, Bill, you're on the tractor, mate. Righto, just slow. Bumper's off. Lucky our bumper didn't fall off in transit between the Northern Territory and here. You can see now making the drawbar made perfect sense because it just makes it so much easier to move a disabled car around. We've got the brakes on the tractor, we've got the power of the tractor, and we did it all at walking pace. It was great. G'day everyone, welcome to the show. It's pretty blowy today, so we might have a bit of background noise floating around, but we can't really change that. This is my Holden Commodore ute, which has been a very much invaluable member of our family, and it's never off the road long enough to actually do things like painting it. It's pretty scruffy. I get a fair bit of flack over the appearance of this car, given that I restore cars for a living. But anyway, our young son Bill headed off to the Northern Territory recently, and he was off there to bit of a change of life and new experiences, and so I offered him the Commodore ute to take up there, and unfortunately 2020 has struck a final blow to us, and on the 12th of the 12th of 2020, if numbers mean anything to you, Bill struck a feral pig with the old ute and it smacked its nose in. In this series we'll look at a bit of a collision repair on this car, and we'll use very simple techniques that can be reproduced at home. I'm not a collision repairer. My shop's set up for restoration work, so I don't have any chassis straightening equipment or things like that. But I do have a few tricks that were taught to me many years ago by some old school beaters that were probably around when they were young, and it's the low-tech version of doing it. So any of you guys that are in the collision repair industry today are going to look at this and cringe, and if you want to put a comment on there saying, geez Rob, that's a bit agricultural, I will accept that, because yes, it is a bit hit and miss. And what we're going to be doing is dragging this damage out with a chain, but we're going to start off with a loose chain and roll the car against the chain and let the chain take the slack up, and then we'll use the mass of the moving car to actually pull the damage out. Now, it's a good method for low impact sort of stuff. The damage on this car is probably at the extent of what you can get away with this method, and we'll probably come into a few problems, and this steel bumper bar in here particularly is going to be the main drama. Now, a lot of people will be looking at this from outside the industry saying, well, why don't you just unbolt that and take it off the car and then repair the pieces? Well, I'm going to use this bar to straighten the car a bit. So what I'm going to do is pull out this main damage in the middle here, and when it was damaged, it's curled that in there. By pulling the centre out, I can spread this back out to roughly where it's supposed to be. This other side here has had big impact on it, and it squashed the rail straight in. So once I get the bar roughly straight across, I can shift the chain and pull from this point here to be pulling the end of the rail back out. But instead of doing it how I described it, I'm going to use a tractor on the front of it, and I'll leave the car parked and I'll take up the slack of the chain with the tractor, and the mass of the tractor will be what pulls this out. Now, it's a little bit experimental, it's very hit and miss. So if you're doing this method, you've got to do a couple of light bumps on it first to see where you're going. It's not the sort of job where you get 6 or 7 of your hairy mates and you just suddenly decide that I've got a length of chain here, I'll tie it on the car and we'll all go pushing the car across the yard at 1,000,000 miles an hour and let the chain take up, because you might just tear the bumper straight off the front of the car, the chain might break and the car might go charging off into your wife's car or into the garden or over the kids or something like that. Now, the chain itself, you must use a good quality chain. I'm going to use a transport chain, and that is about the minimum standard you can get away with. That chain is not designed for that application, and we can even break those. But if you're thinking of going down to the hardware store and buying yourself a length of galvanised chain, forget it, because all that's going to happen is the chain's going to take up, one of the links is going to break, and the car's just going to keep sailing off the wave behind you. So ideally, you want a lifting chain, very expensive, or a proper pulling chain, and once again it's another level again. And the guys who have got proper pulling equipment, they've got very high quality chains on there that they can anchor onto the car and pull, and they've got no worries with issues with chains. We don't have that luxury. We've got to be very careful. This beam actually bolts to the car, and it's got studs with big shouldered nuts that go through flanges on the car. The edge of the nut could actually cut the steel, and all we could do is wind up tearing that off the car and breaking the ends of it. That's a real possibility as well. If that happens, we'll have to look at other techniques to actually anchor the end of the rail and pull it out. When you're looking at any collision repair, basically what we're after is to reverse the impact. So it's worthwhile to actually just look at the car and see where the damage is. This car has hit a feral pig. It has run from this direction across in front of the car, and the body of the pig has collected it here. So it's had a lot of impact right on the end of this frame rail, and it's squashed that mounting point for the bumper right back into the car. And the tail end of the pig has swung in here with the momentum, and it's bent the bumper right back in, and it's destroyed the radiator, the condenser, and the fans are all damaged in there. That's the worst of the damage. The radiator support panel on the top here is bent. That's insignificant. That comes off easy. We can replace that easily. The bottom rail down here, same thing. That'll come off the car. So the most of the damage that we've got to repair is these frame rails. And with this one bumper being pulled in, the left-hand side is mostly just twisted in, whereas the driver's side is squashed in. So we will be focusing on pulling this beam forward to straighten it, and then pulling from over here and getting this rail to straighten up. One of those situations where it doesn't pay to be in a hurry to start ripping things out, because you can cause other problems. Secondary damage is a real thing. If we start tearing this apart and we damage more of the car, then we've got to do more repairs afterwards. So at the moment, the radiator is pinned quite well against the motor by the bumper. So once we pull the bumper forward, we can get the hoses undone and get the radiator out the way, and we can assess for even further damage in the car. But from what I can see, looking along the side rails, either side of the engine, there's no damage there. The steering all works beautifully. The car rolls in a straight line. So I don't think there's any problems with any of the wheel alignment or anything like that from this car. And from what I can see around it, there's no great damage underneath the car. So the impact's happened here, and the only other problem we've got is we've got to replace the airbags in the car. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to chop a hole through the bumper, top and bottom, with the oxy torch, and I'm going to drop a chain through it. We'll get the car repositioned outside, and then we will pull from that. Quite a few people were involved in the story of bringing the car home, so I'll go through and I'll thank a few people along the way. So first of all, the Katherine Police attended the accident site and they arranged for a tilt tray. A big thank you to you guys. Everyone was very professional and friendly and they got the job done quickly. Young Bill got a lift into town with them and naturally had to blow in the bag to prove that he wasn't over the limit or anything like that, but he blew 000, so all good. Centurion Transport and their agent E.E. Mewers and Son were in charge of bringing the car back to Perth. So Centurion, massive company all over the north of Australia and Western Australia, and they did an excellent job in bringing it back to Perth. It was done quickly and efficiently, very friendly people to deal with. We hired a trailer from old mate Chris at Trade Hire in Busselton, and if you're looking for equipment and you're down in the southwest of Western Australia, Trade Hire have got a massive selection of trailers, compactors, all sorts of building equipment and stuff that you might need around the house as well. So worth a call to them if you're looking for some hire equipment. Now this is completely free plugs, everyone. None of this is a commercial. We're just grateful for everyone that's helped along the way. We have another person to thank, is my dad. We borrowed his ute to bring this back with and we towed the trailer with it. Every time there's been any sort of issue where we needed a vehicle, he said, "Oh, the ute's always here, come and grab the ute." Well, this is the first time I've taken him up on it. So thanks to everybody who helped, it's very much appreciated. Got the famous Ferguson system here, not quite the Ferguson system, but the Ferguson straightening system. What I've got to point out is the drawbar height on the tractor is roughly the same height as the bumper. So when that chain pulls up, it's going to be a straight pull out rather than trying to angle it down or angle it up, which could cause more problems for the car. Now because of the hit and miss nature of this sort of work, I'm going to give it a couple of gentle bumps and see what happens, and then we'll assess whether we can keep pulling in this spot. If this idea is going to work or fail, then we'll go from there. So we'll just give it a couple of bumps and we'll see what happens. The handbrake is off and the car's out of gear, so the car is free to roll. We're just going to use the momentum of the tractor to see if we can just pull that frame back out. What's moved it out, we've got it about 100 mil out from where it was, so there's enough room that we can get the radiator out now, so it's actually working. I've put the handbrake on, so that'll keep the car a bit more secure, and we'll give it a couple more little bumps and we'll see where we go from there. But already the bar's starting to straighten out, so it'll be spreading that frame horn on the passenger side further out and closer back to alignment. One of those jobs where you just got to be careful, little bit by little bit, and we'll get a result. Well, we've got the bar pretty much back to how it should look. It's straightened right out. We've actually pulled out the mounting point in here. It's been crushed a bit on the inside. So we've gone as far as we can on this side of the bar. I'd like to just shift the chain over to here and just see if we can get a little bit of a pull on that rail there. Like I said before, we could actually run the risk of tearing the bolt holes through the rail, but at this point in time we've really got nothing to lose. So I'll bring the chain right out here. I'll move the tractor over a little bit so that we get a straight pull rather than an angle pull, and we'll see what happens. That's actually not too bad. I'm thinking we're going to stop at this point now, and we'll move on to a bit of hammer and dolly work in there. I'm thinking some of this will wind up getting cut off and replaced, but I think we're nearly at the extent of what we can achieve. I might just give it one more little bump, but I'll shift the chain so it's in the centre here. Alright, that's about as far as I'm brave enough to pull that. I'll change it so I can pull this centre piece of this bottom skirt, but we'll get the radiator out before then and we'll move on from that. We can take this bar off now. There's no real reason it needs to stay on. Now when I was using the momentum of the tractor, just as the chain was tightening up, I was putting my foot on the clutch, so I wasn't actually trying to drive along pulling it. I was just letting the weight of the tractor take it up. So it's exactly the same thing as if you were rolling the car across the floor and the chain would take up. This method works particularly well where you've got steel bumper cars and the bumper's just been pushed in a little bit on the car, it'll straighten that sort of stuff. Rear bumpers and quarter panels where they've been bumped in, it'll work really well for those sorts of things. Low tech, cheap to do, and something you can get a really good result with if you're patient and don't go bullet a gate at it. Couldn't you get out to help shut the door? Come on, quick. Okay, that's looking a whole lot less scary. We've got the bumper roughly where it should be. We're going to have to repair these frame horns or replace them, probably wind up replacing them. But what I want to do now is just get this bottom part of the radiator support down here, this box section pulled forward, and that should push this area here back out that's got some impact damage. Now it's got quite a bulge in here where it's come in. It's going to need quite a bit of work to repair that. But we can also get the radiator, the aircon condenser, the fans out the way and create a bit of space. And I've left the battery in there, and I will point out now, if you're doing any of this sort of work, the first thing you've got to do is absolutely disconnect the battery, which I had done. I hadn't removed it because it was trapped underneath the radiator and I didn't want to damage it getting it out. So we'll get into pulling it down, and once we've got a bit of space in there, we can look at the next part of the process. This is something we find a lot. The radiator hose is all scrunched up from the accident, so I've got to get in there with a long extension and get the hose clamp undone to get the hose off so I can get the radiator out. It looks like these aircon pipes have been damaged a little bit, but even so, once you start opening up the air conditioner, it pays to seal all the pipes off, because keeping dirt out of it is just as important as doing the rest of the repairs, and it'll save us time and cost later on. So electrical tape's pretty good for sealing off the pipes. I'm not worried about that one because that's just going into the condenser, which is rubbish bin material anyway. But the other pipe here, I'll seal that one off when I take it off. Okay. The banana condenser. What a beauty. Works with banana cars. Okay, well, look at that. It's broken the motor out of the fan on that side, and it's broken the fan motor on this side. So she fair old bump on the front of it. Looks like there's a little bit of a melt line in the plastic. I guess the motor stayed running for a few revolutions once the impact had happened, and it's been tangled up in the drive belt. So that's run off and been chopped by one of the pulleys by the look of it. Well, dead now. Bit of a wobble up there, and a bit of a wobble up down there. The aircon compressor's still turning alright. The balancer still looks alright. And power steering one turns, alternator tension is fine. Well, that all should just about be okay, I would say, back that far. I am thinking that this might actually run. We'll see what happens. And it lives. Well, that's a good feeling. It fired up and ran. Happy car. Easy bit left. Just straighten it out at the front, slop a bit of paint over it and put it all back together. We're nearly done. I've just welded this bit of a tag on here and pulled it out by the bump method, and this edge here was right back in close to this rail, so I've brought it all forward and back out. This whole bottom box section will replace with a second-hand one, or we can actually buy a non-genuine new one and put that on there. But I'm just looking at these rails, and originally I was just going to cut them off and replace the front section. I've got hold of the repair procedure from Holden, and they do say they can be used if they can be straightened well enough, providing they're not too bad. So a little bit tongue-in-cheek at the moment. I've just cut a hole through here with a hole saw, put a shackle on the chain through it, and we'll give it a couple of bumps and just see if it'll come back. I'm of the opinion it's going to be rubbish bin material, but I've got nothing to lose by giving it a little bit of a test pull and seeing what happens. think the pull really needs to be up the top here, but I can't because of this tag's in the way. The shackle won't fit around it. I might just give it another little bit of a nudge and we'll hit it and see what happens. That's brought it in a fair way. We'll see what happens if we just tap it around a bit. Not sure if that's supposed to have a bit of a bulge in there or not. Let's have a look at another one. No, it looks like it's all pretty flat through there. Just see if this wants to come off. Yeah, so it's a flat rail. We'll probably wind up cutting this one off this car and welding that on there. But we've got a good bottom section on this one here. Unfortunately, this car's got some damage on the left-hand rail. The bumper's had a bit of a blow on this side and just bumped it back into the car, but this is repairable, so we might even wind up just stretching this one out again, seeing how it comes up, and then we probably wind up using this front section. Now, if we had the proper hydraulic pulling equipment, we could just pull some tension on here, we could get a dolly inside, work it with the hammer at the same time, and you can do a lot more repair than what we can by using this method. But this is pretty agricultural with the farm tractor, but it's about the crudest method you've got. The only really cool thing is it actually does work. Just trying to think of what is the best way to go. Might give it another bump. It is creeping. Got a big caved in section in here that really wants pulling out, so I don't think we're achieving anything, just wasting a bit of time. But I just sort of one of those things I thought I'd just put on there and see what happens. But it has straightened this area in here quite a bit, so I'm of the opinion I can cut this through here, get a bit of an angle cut on it, weld the other piece on there, and that'll make a good repair there. It's worth my while to do the same on the other side rail and pull some of that forward as well, and that'll save a bit more work with getting it to line up and join back together. So if we get a hole saw through here somewhere, put the shackle on this side, and we'll give this one a bit of a pull as well. Yeah, I don't think we're going to achieve any more. We're starting to tear the hole out of it. But it's moved it a bit, so that's got it closer to where we want to be. So it means this area in here is all useful for cutting it and repairing it. So we've got our frame rails about as straight as they're going to get, so from here on it's replacement. And I've got enough of the car pulled apart that I can start working on this radiator support, but I need the engine out, so that's the next step. Now, this is the first car I've worked on in a smash repair sense that's been equipped with airbags. So I've done a fair bit of research about what you can and can't do. And the other little thing that was worrying me was somewhere around about this era, car manufacturers started changing the steel composition in their cars, and the modern steels can't be welded with a MIG welder. So I was fairly concerned about that. I've got hold of the repair procedure from GMH, primarily for front end impact, radiator support panel replacement, and to do with the rails. Now they tell me that if the rails are not too badly bent, they can be straightened. Well, looking at ours, I think we've gone well past that. So the second option is you can do a half rail replacement, which is what we'll be doing. And they say, cut the rails halfway between the mounting points for the K-frame and weld the new section on the front of it. If there's damage further back in the car, you need to replace the whole rail, which means all the interior coming out, cut all the rail away from the car, and the reality is for a car this old, it's just not worth it, so it would turn it into scrap metal. But I've got hold of a good Commodore shell that's had no front end damage, and I've cut the radiator support off along with the rails, and from here, once the engine's out, I can just trim the rails away, cut away wherever I want to join it here, and we'll undo the spot welds like we'd normally do with restoration work, put it all back together, line it up, and then it's just a case of welding it all together. Now, what I'm hoping, and I haven't got experience with this before, so this is a bit of a learning curve for me, this car would have been built by a robot. So all of the spot welds should be in all the same spots on all the cars. Now, coincidentally, the car I got for parts, the chassis number's within 1,000 of this car. So it was, if it wasn't made on the same day this car was, it would have been made on the next day. So how cool is that? It's all compatible stuff, it's all the right age. Unfortunately, it's not the right colour. And I did put it out there to the universe to give me a green car, but it gave me a grey car instead, but it was local. And let's face it, it's within 1,000 cars of this one, so can't be all bad. I've got my portable skyhook ready, and old Bob the crane, he's pretty good for lifting big heavy things, but he's not so good for the fine tuning. So when I put the old block and tackle on here, I've got the fine tune adjustment that I can actually sort of just creep little bit by little bit, and then when we're ready for a big lift we can go with Bob the crane and lift the motor out. But probably what I'll do is the same sort of deal with using an engine crane. I'll get the engine up and we'll just roll the car back out from underneath it more than trying to shift it with a big tractor. So we'll get him in place and we'll see how we go. It's good to have toys. I like engines that come with lifting hooks. Look at this, come over here. Here's a Ford engine, it comes with a nice hook for lifting the engine out with. Here's a Holden engine, and they give you nothing. You can see why they stopped making them. Still, they stopped making Fords here too. Now I've got the sling around the crank pulley on the front there, and I'm lifting from around the exhaust manifolds on the back, but I've got too much tension on this one and not enough on that one, so I'll just drop him back down again and we'll just shorten this one up a bit. It's always a bit of guesswork. I haven't actually lifted one of these out like this before. The last time I did this car, I took the engine out and left the transmission behind. Just grab a jack and put under the transmission. Whenever you're lifting, even on an engine crane, it's always a good idea to have a jack under the transmission just in case it wants to flip down or anything like that. And that'll just sort of give us that extra safety margin. Here's the other problem. Not quite on the right angle, and our radiator support panel's a bit higher than what it should be. So I'm thinking I might just cut that off. Any glass is just automatically attracted to sparks, and when the sparks land on the glass, they actually melt into the glass. And even if you scrape them off, you still wind up with these little divots everywhere from the grinder sparks. So, where can we chop you? Now, because this is bent, it might want to bite the disc, so I've got to cut it fairly cautiously. Come over here and have a look at this. These are the points where the car's designed to bend at. So these are all little pre-crimps in there, and the back ones are fine, but these front ones here, they've actually got quite a divot in behind it where it's actually pushed back in and bent that. So, true to what GMH says, cutting it somewhere in between is the safe point, because we're past the damage here and there's no damage back there at this point. So if it had been a bigger impact, it would have been more of a problem, and like I say, would have written the car off for me. Another little interesting thing, me being the automotive detective here, the bonnet, both the front fenders, have been replaced in a previous accident. Now I was very surprised because our pig hit with its bum right in the centre of the car and the bulk of its body right on the end of this rail. Now this rail was concertinaed back as you'd expect, but the left hand side, although it was twisted around as we expected, there was quite a bit of damage back in the rail, and I couldn't work it out because it just didn't seem to ring true to me from the pig accident. Then I worked it out. It was pre-existing. This car's been in an accident as a young car, it's been repaired, and there was already a little bit of damage to that rail, and the repairers have decided, well, that's okay, it's not bad enough to be a problem. But when it's had the second impact on the front and it's forced it back into the rail, it's caused a lot more damage than what we should have seen if the rail had been straight. So anyway, get all the front suspension out of it and clean all the wires and things out the way, and we can start cutting it up and welding the new bit on.
Did its job. So, well, there I was, driving down the highway, probably a bit too fast for the conditions. It's night time, coming back from the Christmas do, doing about, I think, 100, 110, which it's after dark, it's night time, not a great plan, as I've found out. I was having a conversation with my passenger, KG, one of my co-workers. I sort of have this instant seared into my memory a bit. Just spotted this pig running across. I really didn't have any time to react to it, just a case of there it was. Planted my foot, you know, next thing really was airbags going off in my face and silence. And I think sort of the first recollection that really came to me was the sound of the fluid dripping out. I could hear what at the time I thought was petrol dripping out at the front of the engine. I think later on we found out it was power steering fluid, but that was my thoughts, was better get out of the car, and then sort of thought first aid as well. The passenger side airbag's gone off as well, and my passenger's sort of just steering forwards and not really responding when I'm sort of talking to him, and after calling his name a few times he sort of seemed to come to it and got out of the car and had a bit of a look at the impact. There'd been another car coming the opposite direction at the same time, so there'd been their lights on coming, and that's part of why I hadn't seen the pig until the very last minute, was bright lights coming the opposite direction. Around this point I'd sort of cottoned on that they'd pulled over and stopped, so I thought to myself that was awfully kind of them, just stopping to see if we were all right. When I went over there to see why they hadn't come over, it turned out that the pig that had run across, hit our car, kept going and then hit their car. And so that one pig rode off 2 cars. Called Mum and Dad and apologised, said I'm very sorry but I've hit a pig with your car.